Hi, everyone. It's so exciting to have everyone with us this evening for Protecting the Trees. This is I think, a really fun presentation. Trees are so valuable on a day like today, midsummer. You really appreciate how valuable trees are. And really, we couldn't live in any cities or suburbs without them. So, super important. And I very much want to thank the good people of California American Water for sponsoring this evening's workshop. Wendy, you want to just say hi to folks?
Sure. Yeah, I would like to say hi from California American Water. I am the Southern Region's water conservation specialist, and I welcome everybody to this webinar. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedules to be with us. I know you're going to gain some valuable information, which G3 always shares with us. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Wendy. Okay, well, we are going to go ahead and if we can get everybody to go into the background, myself included here. And one thing I want just to let you know is that you are going to be getting a link to some resources. It's going to come to you through the email that you used to register for the workshop. And one of the things you'll be getting is a link to a PDF of this book, which has a lot of general information about garden making. And I highly recommend that you go through that. It will help you. It has great examples of gardens and transformations from lawn into landscape. And I think you'll really enjoy it. All right. So this is how we are going to roll this evening. For protecting the trees, we're going to start talking about trees and their benefits kind of generically. There's some things that you may not know about why we are so passionate about trees. We're going to talk about something that we call horticulture. You'll understand what that is in a minute. Then we'll discuss the trees, roots, and soil, some tips for protecting trees, how to do proper watering, and then some really good guidance on how to plant more trees and really kind of create some incentives to plant more trees. So let's start with trees and their benefits. Look, trees in the wild. This is a really important thing for us to understand is that trees are not ornaments. They're not sofas, or rugs. They are living organisms. They are creatures that have experienced a lot of this world. And they are essential hosts for a lot of other living things on this planet. As an example, oak woodlands alone can support more than 5,000 species of insects and arachnids. And when you understand how many other species are dependent on insects and arachnids, you can understand, why it's important for us to protect places like oak woodlands and many other woodland types, but oaks here in California especially are important. There are many trees that are actually keystone species, and that means that these are species that if they disappeared, there would be a collapse of many, many other species. So, keystone species are particularly important to us when we talk about biodiversity, and even just when we talk about, the joy of living on planet Earth. And trees benefit the earth in multiple ways. The one that you see here, for example, besides, I just think these are very beautiful trees, is shade. Shade is super important, and trees give it to us. They are actually the lungs of the earth. And it's kind of important to understand that without this, we would be in serious problem because they're able to extract carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, and they strip away the carbon. They use it for their bodies and so forth. We'll talk about that in a bit. But then they release the oxygen back into the atmosphere. And on top of that, they actually release water vapor back into the atmosphere. So they're not just breathing in and out, and providing us with oxygen, but they're also providing us with air conditioning, which is the water vapor. So, pretty important stuff. They provide food, of course. Wetlands protection. It's something that we often don't think about, but for those of you in the Delta, of course, trees are a super important part of that flood, erosion protection, and wetlands protection. They provide habitat of all kinds, reptiles and amphibians, of course, and we often don't think about them as being tree habitat. We mentioned the insects and arachnids, but if you drill down into that, you realize that oak trees themselves are actually supporting more than 500 different species of just moths and butterflies. And why is that important? Well, birds, for example, have to have the soft bodies of caterpillars in order to survive. I mean, and it's at least 50%, in many cases, more than that, of the diet of young birds. And so, without these soft bodied insects and without the trees to host the moths and butterflies that, go through the metamorphosis cycle and have the soft bodies, there would be an utter collapse in bird species as well. There are birds of prey that are hosted in trees, and of course, mammals. Yes, okay. This is kind of a cheap shot because it's a love-hate relationship, right, with the squirrels, but honestly, it's so cute. The roots of trees actually act as cisterns. This is important to understand because the root zone of plants in general is the most important fresh water source on the planet. And when you look at a tree like this, it could have a massive root system that goes not just wide, but deep. And within that root system, there is a huge community of microbes and interacting with the roots, and they are essentially spending their entire life cycle holding on to water in the soil. So without tree roots, we would have a lot of challenges with groundwater and with water supply. In urban settings, they're absolutely critical to having healthy cities. I see a picture like this, and I often think about property values and that sort of thing. And of course, trees are often talked about in that context. But you really wouldn't be able to live in many places that we are successfully living if we didn't have tree cover providing that shade, providing that evapotranspiration, air cooling. They conserve energy. When you plant a tree like this one that is deciduous, in other words, it loses its leaves in the winter time, it's doing kind of a dual purpose energy thing. And during the summertime, it's giving us the shade. So, because it has its leaves on, but then after it loses its leaves in the wintertime, it's allowing that sunlight to come into our homes and warm them up. So, deciduous trees are super important. Then we have trees that are really well adapted to reducing stormwater runoff in urban and suburban areas. If we can devise strategies for slowing, spreading, and sinking water um, around these trees, we really take advantage of the fact that they have these massive canopies that are going to slow down the water and direct them into our rainwater capture systems. Of course, there are massive psychological benefits from trees. I mean, just looking at this picture is, calms me down, despite the fact that we're doing a webinar and that can be stressful. Yeah, so the trees themselves, the leaves have a form that is like a fractal form, and they reflect light in really interesting ways. And our brains are fascinated by that. And it actually allows our brains to focus on things that sort of defrag our memory systems and the whole computer up here. They're super important for psychological benefits. But we often do something that we refer to as horticulture. Look, cities that don't have trees very quickly become deserts. And cities that don't have trees become social deserts. This is very important for us to remember. Um, there are studies that have been conducted, multiple studies about the benefits of trees with regard to reducing crime. When there are trees present on streets, crime is reduced. In part, that's because of the cooling effect and so forth. But also, who wants to be on a street, especially in the summertime, if there is no shade, if there is, no delight in being on that street? And so, um, many businesses, kind of have uh, a relationship with trees that is difficult because they block signs or they block windows. But honestly, the more trees we would have on streets, the more people we would have on streets. And we can't reap all those wonderful benefits that we've talked about for trees if they aren't healthy. And the way that we treat them really doesn't allow them to be healthy. This practice of pruning annually just to avoid leaf drop is one of the most horrible practices for trees. Um, it is actually a torture. And the result is that they are dying. And the practices like that annual pruning actually exacerbate drought. They create weak structure that promotes disease. And so we're really affecting all the trees in our urban and suburban landscapes when we don't treat them properly. We allow trees to be in bare soil. This is not how trees want to live. We place them in gravel because we think this is designy and has some kind of aesthetic value to it. But the problem here is that when we plant in gravel like this, we're actually making things hotter at the roots of this tree. There's no food for microbes, which are essential to keeping trees healthy. And the maintenance of dealing with any kind of leaf litter that might drop here, it becomes very difficult when you have gravel. And let's not forget that the trees actually really want leaf litter right at their base. So, just from an aesthetic point of view, this usually ends up being something that's not, um, that isn't as great as it may seem in a book. So limit your gravel to pathways or to seating areas or gathering areas and keep the trees in the ground with the mulch around them. The same goes for planting trees in decomposed granite. It's the exact kind of situation. They don't have the microbial activity. They don't have the cooling effect of having their leaves around them. When we put down mulch that is these giant pieces of bark, we are really harming the tree itself. Uh, First of all, because this size of mulch doesn't decompose, and trees want plant material, they want their leaf material and so forth at their roots in order to decompose to feed the microbes. When we put these huge pieces of bark around the tree, we're holding water against the roots, which is not good. We're not decomposing. Everything is pretty, this is definitely not the way to go. Sorry about that. Ivy, same thing. When we let ivy grow around the tree or up into the tree, it will actually smother a tree. It may happen. It may take some time to do it, but it will definitely harm the tree ultimately. The same thing with rocks. It's the same thing as having those big pieces of mulch. When we put rock down around trees, and you see this all the time. I mean, you go to a nice hotel, right? And they've got giant rocks around the bases of their trees. It's a really poor practice. It holds water against the roots of the trees without the benefit of decomposition, and it doesn't feed the microbes in the soil. It doesn't keep those roots cool. It's just really bad. When we water them and we try to uh, give them what we think they need. We have to be really careful because we can actually apply too much water. And especially if we don't have any small mulch, the soils are depleted, they're compacted. And so when we apply water, they run off or they cause something like this, which is all this moss covering. This is in a Southern California scenario. There shouldn't be any moss at the roots of the trees. And also, the trees want the water at the roots, not on the trunks. When we hit the trunks with our spray irrigation, we are actually damaging that trunk. If we have drip irrigation, we want to make sure it's at the base of the tree. I think that's pretty straightforward. When we stake trees, okay, this is definitely an issue. Because we're using what are essentially nursery stakes that are designed to be in containers to hold trees, to train trees to be upright. When they go in the ground, those nursery stakes should be coming out. Those are not, the tree is not meant to be kept on the nursery stake. And it's not meant to be kept on stakes forever. Stakes should be, I'm going to show you a picture of the proper technique in a bit, but stakes should be cross staked, allowing a little bit of movement in the trunk. That movement in the trunk against the roots allows that tree to get stronger in its position. And the picture on the right is just really devastating, having a tree like this with um, the stakes in that position. It's just it's made the tree weaker. When we plant trees, and we allow ourselves to create these giant ponds, and you see this all the time when trees are planted. The challenge with this is that the water sits up against the roots and the trunk of the tree instead of shedding off. This tree should actually be planted up higher, and the basin should be down larger and allow the water to flow away from the roots of the tree, not create a pond around the trunk. And then, we butcher trees. This picture makes me so sad because this tree, is a 70-foot tree, 70 foot tall, 70 foot wide, and it has been butchered down into this shape. So, they need our help, no question. So, what can we do? Well, first, we need to understand what's going on with trees in the roots and soil. And this is really going back to something that we talk about all the time when we talk about landscaping, is understanding how the plants fit into the watershed approach, or the watershed wise landscape. They're an integral part of any watershed, but on our property, they fill multiple roles. I mean, the watershed approach is essentially has four principles. The first is building healthy living soil that acts like a sponge. We want to select climate appropriate plants, and so trees fit perfectly into that part. We want to capture rainwater and hold it in the soil. That's what passive capture is. Use it as a resource. I talked about how trees are cisterns, so they fit into that. And then we also want to use highly efficient supplemental irrigation only when necessary. So trees that are well grown on a site need not a lot of water. They sometimes do need supplemental water, but when we select climate appropriate plants, climate appropriate trees, we're doing the right thing. And the cool thing about trees is they actually are able to control their environments. I talked about this a little bit earlier. But what they are doing is they're taking that carbon out of the atmosphere, and they sequester that carbon in the soil to feed a microbial community that is grown at the roots of that tree. The tree shares those resources with other plants in the landscape, and they rely on this microbial community to find and mine nutrients out of the soil profile and share it with them. So the trees really expend a lot of their energy managing the soil, turning the soil into a big sponge, turning it into a cistern, and they do all this for free. And at their roots, there is a soil party going on. It's important to remember that there are billions and billions and billions of microbes in that soil profile, helping those trees cycling nutrients. So when the tree drops its leaves, its blossoms, its fruit, maybe, what it is doing is trying to replenish the organic matter in the soil around its roots. It's dropping that plant material right at its own feet so that this microbial community that it has nurtured can decompose that organic matter and continue to thrive. And in doing that, the tree is actually creating a defense shield around it. It's reducing its water requirement. It's eliminating its fertilizer requirement, and it's boosting its own immune system, making it more resilient in times of drought and in times of stress from pests. It actually can repel pests when it's allowed to have its own leaf matter and biology at its roots. Now, trees have a special relationship with fungi in the soil. There's a completely symbiotic relationship, and the fungi actually connects trees within a landscape. The fungi cannot photosynthesize, so it relies on the tree to do the photosynthesis, but the fungi needs carbon. So because it can't photosynthesis, it will pair up with a tree and agree to share resources with the tree so that the tree will give it carbon. This is an amazing thing. The fungi are able to extract all kinds of nutrient from the soil. They're able to store and transport water across vast areas. And so this relationship between trees and fungi is super, super important. And when we think about an urban forest, or we even think about just the mini forest that we could have in our own yards, it's kind of important to really understand this relationship that trees have with the microbial community and with fungi in particular. Fungi actually help a tree to manage the entire forest. And a great example of that is something that we call the mother tree. In many landscapes where you have an older tree, that tree will actually manage the carbon flow through the microbial and fungal network out into the landscape. In a forest situation, a mother tree can actually identify its own seedlings in the forest. It can send carbon to those seedlings because those seedlings are in the shade of the other trees and they can't, photosynthesize. So the mother tree will share carbon with its own seedlings to help it, when it's in the shade. And something really quite beautiful happens in a landscape when you have deciduous trees and evergreen trees. Um, when the deciduous trees lose their leaves in the wintertime, of course, they can't do that photosynthesis because they don't have the leaves. So evergreen trees will continue to photosynthesize and will take part of the carbon that they are sequestering and actually share it with the deciduous trees, allowing them to continue to benefit, from photosynthesis, even though they can't do it themselves. And then in the springtime, when those deciduous trees put their leaves back on, they return the favor to the evergreens and share carbon back to the evergreens. So I think it's important for us to really kind of take this in and think about it from a design perspective, from a landscape management perspective, and even from an urban forest perspective, that when you see a single tree sitting in concrete, This is a very sad case because trees are social beings. They're connected by a fungal network in nature. And we really want to mimic that if we can do it in our own landscapes. Even when a tree is dying, it still has an important role. About 40% of the carbon from that dying tree will actually be taken by the tree and pushed out through the fungal network to benefit the neighboring trees. So, how do we use some of this understanding of the trees and their roots and soil in order to protect them? Well, first of all, keep the mulch in place. They love their own mulch, they love their own leaves. We want to try to keep their own leaves, at their feet. And in the absence of their own leaves, we want to make sure that we have a 3 to 4 inch thick layer of uh, mulch that is relatively small that will decompose. But we do want to kind of keep it away from the trunk. Now, that's, I know, an interesting thing to say in this picture because the tree has dropped leaves right up to its trunk. And in this case, we're not messing with it. The tree is doing its thing here, and it seems to be perfectly fine. But if we were importing mulch and putting it in here, we would not allow it to touch the trunk of the tree. We, respect that trunk. And we also want to respect the drip line of a tree. So the drip line is where the canopy of the tree ends. That is the essence of the drip line. And so even though the tree roots may go way beyond the canopy of the tree, we absolutely want to make sure that we are not planting inside of the drip line. We want to plant at the drip line or beyond, and then allow the plants to figure out, where they're going to be. Sure, plants may that you plant out at the drip line may end up, growing into the shade of the tree. That's perfectly fine. But if you're going to disturb the soil, you don't want to do it under the drip line, inside the canopy. You want to stay outside that drip line. Something that we recommend doing for trees that are having, some kind of struggle is what we call vertical mulching. And one way to very quickly vertical mulch or vertical compost, this is sometimes called, is going out to that drip line and using a hand auger, like you see here, like a drill bit of 15 to 18 inches long, and essentially poking holes in the soil out at that drip line. So you're making air passages essentially into the soil, and then raking some compost or really good worm castings over those holes, and gently watering it in. This will actually help trees, and it helps the root systems of trees. Trees actually love to be near rain gardens, but they don't usually want to be in them. Now, there's some exceptions to that, but we want to respect, again, that drip line. Even if we're planting new trees, we want to just be thinking about, hey, how do we keep our excavations for our rain gardens, away from away from that drip line? How do we keep it, nice and shallow, so that the trees can benefit? And we don't really want to plant in the basin that is around a tree unless that tree is riparian. So, in other words, we're not taking a tree that is a drought loving tree and plopping it into the middle of our rain garden. That is not going to work. Well, it might work if it's a riparian tree. So if the tree is uniquely adapted to living in a creek situation where it has water all the time or most of the time, it can get a lot closer to the edge of the rain garden. A really good rule, though, to follow is just keep it out of the rain garden, keep it out of the depression, put it on the berm next to the depression, and let its roots do its thing. It'll send its roots into the rain garden, and that's perfectly fine. And you've given it a chance to get going without rotting. Don't mess with the grade around a tree. This is the perfect way to rot the bark on a tree. So what we mean by that is if you have a tree that is already established, You don't want to then come in and start mounding soil up, to cover the roots of the tree. You're mounding soil up and you're actually allowing that soil to be in contact with the bark of the tree. This is a sure way to kill the tree. If you have a tree, you need to respect that original grade and figure out how you're going to grade around it. It sometimes is a real design challenge, but it is a worthwhile thing to figure out. Now, one thing that we recommend pretty much in every single landscape scenario is doing something called integrated pest management. This is an approach to figuring out what's going on with the plant that starts with observation and uses very limited, very minimalist interventions, uh, and not jumping straight to, oh, apply fertilizer, oh, apply herbicide, oh, apply some kind of pesticide. It's saying, okay, let's take a look at the tree and think of it as a holistic approach to the health of that tree. Really, when we use integrated pest management, the number one thing is that preventative measures go further than any kind of intervention. So if we have a healthy tree, that tree is going to be resistant to pests and disease. So let's focus on a healthy tree. In order to do that, we need to focus on healthy soil. Those two things go together. And also, if we are in a neighborhood where there are a lot of trees that are of one particular species, it's an opportunity for us to plant some more diversity. The greater the diversity of the trees in the neighborhood, the more resilient the entire neighborhood is. That urban forest becomes more resilient when we have a greater diversity of trees in the system. We want to make sure we keep our eyes on our trees, look up, look down, make sure that we are monitoring it for stressful conditions like drought and extreme heat. And we definitely never, ever, ever want to be applying fertilizers to trees. There's no reason to do it. When we apply anything to trees to help their soil conditions and help that microbial community, we want to be using compost and mulch, worm castings instead of compost, that's fine, but no fertilizers. And the reason is, by the way, that fertilizers actually uh, make the tree weaker. And so the result is that a tree that is being fertilized will be more susceptible to pests. Please research and hire a licensed professional to prune your trees and your large shrubs. What you see happening here, the reason that this tree looks like a chia pet is because it has been pruned improperly. And every single tiny little pore on the tree that could possibly put out a leaf to try to help the tree to photosynthesize and recover has been stimulated by this poor pruning. And as a result, we get the leaves coming out of every part of the tree, the trunk, all the branches, everything. And so, and those leaves are extremely weak. So we really want to avoid this kind of thing. A licensed professional would not be doing this. You want to avoid these pruning practices. The number one thing is that you never take more than 25% of a canopy of a tree in any one growing season. So if you see a tree that is being drastically reduced, this is harming the tree really dramatically. And when you start to see something like topping, which is on the right-hand side, which is basically cutting off the head of the tree, this tree will not recover from this. Now, there are very specific design practices that do something called coppicing, which is cutting the top of the tree or cut, kind of stunting the tree for a particular shape. But this is only to be done by professionals. This is not something that is just done, because, the tree was dropping leaves or whatever. And certainly not to this particular tree. That will not recover. Lion's tailing is what you see on the left. This is when you see pruning that allows all this weak leaf material and branch material at the end of these big long branches. Those basically become sails in the wind. So when that wind comes whipping through there, it captures those leaves, and this is one of the biggest reasons that we start to see limbs coming off of trees during windstorms, is they've been lion's tailed. If we are in drought, stop pruning. There should be no aesthetic pruning whatsoever during a drought period. The reason is that the tree needs water in order to recuperate from pruning. So as soon as you cut that tree, it is looking for water and it needs that water to heal itself. If we're in a drought, it will not be able to access sufficient water to fix itself, and it will end up, dramatically harming the tree. So if you have to do any kind of pruning at all during a drought, it would only be for removing something that's dead, damaged, or diseased, and otherwise not at all. You want to be very cautious about pruning trees that might have birds in them. It is actually, in California, there are many regulations against pruning trees that have nests or eggs in them of any bird. And there are some birds which are even, kind of higher on the hierarchy, so to speak, hawks and hummingbirds and owls and so forth. So you really want to be cautious between March and August. Forget it. But really, at any time of year, you want to be cautious of nests. If you are doing construction and you have trees on your property, it's really great to make a plan with your contractor about how those trees are going to be protected. If vehicles are run over the roots, if chemicals are dumped anywhere around those trees, and believe me, I have seen painters and stucco workers taking buckets of stuff and dumping them at the roots of the trees, thinking, oh, the tree will fix that. What are they thinking? Yeah, they're not thinking. All of these things create physical injury to the tree. And you may not see that physical injury, during the construction period, but within a few years, you will see the results of this. And you need to take that from me as an expert, because I, unfortunately, have allowed that to happen on projects that I've done in the past and have paid the price for it. So really, protecting trees during construction is essential. Let's talk about proper watering. What do we do when we have trees in lawn? What are we doing to the trees? Well, first of all, this is a really dangerous situation for a tree, because the tree becomes reliant on this frequent watering that we have to do in order to keep the very short root structure of lawn, keep that lawn alive. It only has a few inches of roots. A tree has got massive root systems. But if you are watering around that tree to the benefit of this very short rooted plant, you're training that tree to also have short roots. And if it has short roots, it's not going to be able to access water any time of stress, of anything, heat, wind, and drought especially. But what happens if you have a tree and lawn and then you turn the sprinklers off completely? You have to be careful in this situation too, because that tree has been trained. It needs to be able to access some water. And I think this is an important understanding, that water in landscapes is a benefit to our community. We just need the right amount of water to be applied to landscapes, and trees are a great example of this. This tree could be as much as 10% of the value of this property. and it cannot live without water. We just turned off the sprinklers. This tree is suffering and will probably die. So when we are removing lawn, we really want to be cautious about the trees and take extra special steps. One thing that we can do, no matter what, is we can put drip irrigation separate from the lawn on the tree. And this is going to require that we remove the grass from around the tree and then we install drip irrigation. I'm going to show you pictures of that. Each tree or each group of trees should have its own drip line. And in order to have the trees separated from grass, you really need to have a separate valve that is running the drip irrigation that is around the trees. It's a whole new irrigation line, not like just tapping off of the lateral lines that are running the lawn. The California Center for Urban Horticulture, you'll get a link to this, actually has this wonderful thing called a tree ring irrigation contraption. You can connect that to a hose and make these concentric circles around a tree. And this can allow you to irrigate the tree separately from the lawn, especially if you've just removed the lawn. Now, when you take out turf, and you install a new drip irrigation system around a tree, there are a couple things that you need to think about. So remember, those roots are at least under the canopy and beyond. They are where you need to have the water. So you need to make sure that you have these concentric circles of irrigation, drip irrigation, going around the tree trunk. But remember, you don't want to be up against the tree trunk. So you start 12 to 24 inches away from that trunk. And that really depends on how big the tree is. And then you go in these concentric circles at, anywhere from 18 or 24 inches apart. And you make concentric circle after concentric circle all the way out to the drip line. And then you go one more beyond the drip line. That's how far the grass should be removed if you are keeping grass, but you're trying to make the tree healthier. And if you've completely removed the grass, that is definitely how much the drip irrigation should be. The objective here is that 50% of the soil is wet when you run that irrigation. So at least 50% of that soil looks like it is getting wet. And then okay, you are adequately watering this tree. Regardless of what is planted around a tree, even if it's not grass, if it's other shrubs and so forth, you actually want to have a separate irrigation valve that is dedicated to the tree or to the trees and large shrubs in the landscape. You want to keep them separate. They have a whole different water requirement. They've got very deep roots. They are going to want their water infrequently, but they're going to need a considerable amount of water when they are watered. So it's best to have a completely separate valve in order to run that. There are ways that you can water trees, especially if they're young or if they're in areas where you don't have access to irrigation or you're in the midst of a transformation. And so you want to make sure that the trees are getting established. That often happens. The grass comes out and the first thing that goes in is the trees because you're trying to get them established. That's totally doable. And there are a couple of great ways that you can keep trees alive, like the tree diapers that you see here, or tree gators. These are basically filled up by hoses, and then they very slowly leak that water out. So you need to fill them maybe once a week, once every couple weeks, depending on how hot it is and so forth. How much water do you actually need for your tree once you have planted it? Well, it depends on a bunch of things, like all irrigation. Depends on the soil type, the depth of the roots, the time of the year that you are planting, or the time of the year that you're irrigating, whether it's deciduous or evergreen, and also the garden context. What is it, where is it placed, and what kind of system are you using to water it? Are you using spray? I hope not. are you using drip irrigation? There's a wonderful watering calculator that we recommend for at least getting you started to understand how much water you would need to apply. You know, many of the new weather-based irrigation systems have this kind of information that you plug into it. If you don't have a weather-based irrigation system, this is a good way to kind of get started. You're at least in the ballpark with the right amount of water. So using the Center for Landscape and Urban Horticulture, and again, you're going to get a link to this. You select the trees and you put in information about your tree. How wide is that canopy? A lot, you know, think about it. The canopy, which is where all the leaves are, that is what's doing the photosynthesis. That is what's actually requiring water to keep itself cool. So you want to know, what is the diameter of that? You also want to know, how much water does the California irrigation management system say grass needs in your area? Now that's something really for the irrigation class, which I recommend you come to. But you can find this information by going to the CIMIS or CIMIS network, and this particular calculator has a link that allows you to go there and put in the name of your city, and you can get this information. So you put in the information, and then it will tell you how many inches per week. Now, that is really great for a professional who understands inches per week, but I'm looking for gallons. Okay, if we had to boil it down, trees and shrubs perform acceptably when they're irrigated about, I mean, if they're young trees and if they are not particularly drought tolerant, it could be once a week or as long as 3 weeks in the summertime. So if you have a drought tolerant tree or a tree that is already established, watering them essentially once a month. And again, you want to water them so that 50% of that area under their canopy is moist and the water is sinking in. Let's talk about planting more trees because we definitely need to do that. Here's a suggestion of where to place a tree. I personally love this placement. This is, I call this the, the graceful entry. Planting a tree so that when you walk into a home, and you walk into that front area, you're able to walk under the canopy of the tree is a very gracious way to have a tree in the landscape. This also, allows the home to be cooled at the entry. We can also use two trees in the landscape to kind of frame a view. I know that this drawing doesn't have it, but I always imagine that there is a window in the front here that looks out into the front yard. And these two trees now have been placed so that when I'm inside the home looking out, I'm looking under the canopy of the trees. And we can also use trees to create a sense of enclosure. So having even 3 or 4 trees in the landscape that basically turn that landscape into a private setting, our own private forest, is just a great way to go. When we plant a tree, we don't just plop it into the dirt. Like planting pretty much anything, and these directions are actually in your guidebook that you're going to be getting, you are going to want to make sure that the hole that you are planting the tree in is absolutely wet, that all the soil surrounding that new tree is completely wet. And the way you do that is by filling up that hole a couple of times and allowing it to drain out, and then also actually watering the plant before it comes out of its can or out of its box and into the ground. And then after it goes into the ground, you water it again. So lots and lots of water. You want to be thinking in your placement about how big roots get. Okay? Enough said. And as soon as you plant that tree, you want to make sure that you already have a plan for the irrigation and making sure it's irrigated properly with those concentric rings. Vertical mulching, we talked about this before with an existing tree, but when you plant a tree, you can do it too, where you actually take a perforated pipe like you see here, and you have it installed vertically next to the root ball of the plant. that vertical pipe, it has the holes in it. You put a cap on it so that you don't see it. But wow, how great is this? You now have access down into the roots of this tree. It's an oxygen pathway. You can pack that thing with worm castings and slowly have that that biological material coming out into the soil. If it is a place where, you know, you've got some kind of stress or problem with the tree, you can put a hose in that and actually fill that up with water. So this is a great way to kind of, you know, prevent problems down the road, this vertical mulch when you do a new tree. Cross staking, I talked about before, taking it off of the nursery stake. And cross staking, what you have here is enough stability for this tree, this very young little tree, and it's still on the nursery stake, so I would cut that off. But you can see here that once that nursery stake comes off, this tree is going to have some be able to move a little bit, and that's really important for root structure. You remove all of that cross staking after a year and reevaluate. Okay, so what are some next steps? Make sure you look out for those links. Go out and take a look at your trees. I mean, even if there's nothing, you know, especially if there's nothing wrong with your trees, I guarantee your mood will improve. And make, you know, whatever improvements you need, especially to your irrigation system and the irrigation runtime, and tell your friends about these other classes. I want to talk a little bit about turf removal programs in Los Angeles and Ventura. California American Water has rebates that start at $2 a square foot. It depends on where you are, so you need to go to these resources. Again, you're going to get them in the links. So follow those resources to learn more about these programs, but there is money available for removing grass in some areas. In San Diego, it's $1.50 a square foot, up to 750 square feet in residential or 2,500 square feet for commercial. In Sacramento, Meadowbrook and Hillview, it's $2 a square foot while the supply, you know, the money lasts. Again, there's some great guides for doing the removal, and there's also more information at amwater.com, and these links are all being sent to you. So don't stress about screen printing right now. In Larkfield and Gyersville, it's $1 a square foot for removing the turf. Again, you can go to that Sonoma County specific area to learn more about it. And there are rebates on irrigation controllers and other outdoor devices at SoCalWatersmart.com. You'll get that link too. We love your feedback. I'm going to encourage Marilee to put the evaluation up. I'm going to stop sharing. And hopefully everyone can undo their screen. And it's okay, Marilee, if you're not able to do it, I can do it, I think.
Okay, there's been a lot of questions. I've kind of been listing ones that you might want to cover because it's kind of general. There's one that's, what do you think about the root barrier deep watering systems?
What do you think about them?
I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that if the soil is compacted and the water is not getting into the soil, then you need to auger it like you talked about so that the water can penetrate. But when you push those systems down, you could be harming the roots as you push those rods into the soil. So just get it open.
Yeah, I mean, there's always exceptions to rules. Mm-hmm. In general, thinking about your plant placement when you plant trees is really important, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of the root barrier, but also the deep root systems. I have seen many more trees suffer from the anaerobic conditions that can be caused at their roots when they have those deep watering systems. So I shy away from them. I know people who use them successfully, and I think that's great. As someone who's maybe not a professional and really can't work through all the pros and cons in the field, and you're just giving advice to maybe a gardener or somebody who's planting a tree for you, I would avoid it. Concentrate on having the healthy soil. Do the vertical mulch, like put those perforated pipes in the ground at the time of planting. And that allows you some flexibility that if for some reason you find the tree is, struggling, it allows you to put the worm castings in there. It allows you to drop a hose in there if it absolutely needs to. I think that's probably a less expensive and more flexible approach than the deep root watering. And
There's a new one about the acorns are dropping on the pin oak, and I just wanted to say that all oaks have acorns that are dropping this time of year. And you did mention the biology, that there's a lot of species on oak trees. And Doug Tallamy, who's one of the most prolific book writers of etymology and all the stuff that is on oaks, has books just on oaks. And one of the things that's interesting about oaks and acorns is there is an insect that drills a hole in an acorn, then puts its larva eggs inside the acorn, and then seals that with a little bit of mud. And in order for that larva to hatch and become live, when the acorn falls to the ground and bounces, that insect has 12 hours to get out of the acorn and into the soil before a bird eats it. And so when you're trying to harvest acorns to plant to grow on, you float them in water. If they float them in water, that means that they were eaten by that insect and they're not viable. But acorns are now
hollow.
falling all over the city. This is the time of year that's when it happens.
yeah,
And
Yeah,
then
it's not
there's
something to
another one
worry
on
about.
Gorilla hair too. So what do you think about gorilla hair, Pamela?
oh, I am anti-gorilla hair, as anti as you can get. It is well, first of all, if you're in a fire zone, forget it, right? That is one of the worst things that you could possibly have in a fire zone. But the purpose of mulch is decomposition, right? The tree, if you think about what happens naturally, the tree drops all of its leaves and so forth on the ground, right at its roots, to decompose by the soil party that it has going at its roots. When you put down gorilla hair, it takes a really long time to decompose. And that is just antithetical to what mulch is about. Mulch needs to be cycling. We want to keep that 3 to 4 inches of organic matter on the soil at all times, in the root zone and so forth. But we want it to be disappearing. We want it to be cycling. And eventually the tree makes its own mulch and you don't have to keep adding to it in order to provide that. So yeah, ixnay on the Arilla gay.
So one asked when you were talking about the concentric circle irrigation, if it's other than, because I wasn't hearing totally because I was trying to answer a question. The concentric circles can be done with regular drip line.
Yes.
But then you were saying that there's a product that comes as a package?
Yeah, so there is the tree ring contraption.
Yeah.
And
Irrigation
where-
contraption.
And where
Yeah.
do they
love
get that?
word.
And where do you buy that?
You make it.
Oh,
Yeah,
you make it. Okay, so it's regular drip tubing. Okay.
Yes.
yeah, and
So a little point on drip tubing. So there's different manufacturers of drip tubing. And every manufacturer tries to get a size that's unique to their company. So you have to buy their parts to join it together. You can't buy one manufacturer like Taro and use Rainbird connectors or Netafim and Rainbird. You have to stick with the connectors that go with the manufacturer that you do. Otherwise it pulls apart.
right. Let's see. So let's quickly bang out these questions here and then call it. Okay, vertical mulch with worm castings for a mature tree or just a new tree. Okay, you can. So I showed sort of 2 approaches to vertical mulching. One is for new trees where you're going to actually install at the time of planting, just outside the root ball of the plant, you're going to install a perforated pipe. And that goes all the way down to the bottom of the roots. That is going to allow you to have access in the future. For existing trees, what we are using is a hand drill. We basically get an 18-inch, 3/8 inch or 5/8 inch drill bit, and you're poking holes in the soil. How close? It depends how compacted things are. I mean, generally I try to keep them, 2 feet apart, 3 feet apart, but you can go a little closer than that. You're staying at the drip line or beyond, right? You're not underneath the tree when you do this. You're out at the drip line and you're poking some holes in the soil, and then you rake the worm castings around that. Worm castings are water soluble. So you're just going to rake that around there, then water the whole thing in, and you've created oxygen pathways, and now you've, kick-started the soil microbiology by getting those worm castings on. And that's a great thing. And you don't do this all the time. You do this, when you see something going on with the tree, maybe, or every few years, right? This is not something that you shouldn't need to do it, because you should actually see improvement in the soil profile really fast when you do this kind of stuff. Then just a couple of months, you'll see it.
There's one that has a redbud tree, so I'm assuming that's a Cercis. And there's native,
Yeah.
and then there's non-native, there's East and West Coast, and they had it growing in a pot. It's now 8 feet tall. They said, should we put it in the ground?
I said, well, I got started on that, and I said, yeah, I think you take the suffering, moment of getting it out of the pot. But I mean, it depends, right, on your situation. If you have a space for it, it will do really quite well in the ground. And it's a wonderful understory tree also. Beside being a nice specimen, it can also be an understory. So if you've got, a larger tree, trees on your property, you're able to have that tree within the shade of the other trees. Not saying underneath the tree, but within the shade of it. So I think it's a great, very very adaptable tree, and might as well take it out of the pot if you can, and take that little suffering. It's going to take a minute when it comes out of the pot. It's not going to be happy. But with enough water, when you plant it, things should be okay.
You could also time when you're doing that when it's deciduous.
Right, that's a good idea.
Because the roots are probably twirling around in the pot, and you can kind of bare root it. You can untangle those roots a little bit easier when the tree's dormant. We've got another one is, should I use another tree's leaves around a tree, a fruit tree near the?
Sure.
Yep, no problem.
Yep, they share. Trees like to share. All right. Well, this has been really super fun. I have enjoyed it very much, and I hope you have too. As always, Wendy, it's great to see you. Marilee, it's fantastic to see you. Thank you so much for the beautiful answers. Okay, what's the difference between mulch and compost, Marilee? Quickly.
Mulch, you can kind of tell what it is that's decomposing, and compost, you can't tell anymore. It just looks like soil.
Looks like soil.
Exactly. If it looks like leaves and bits of bark, that's mulch. Stays on top. Compost, can't tell. Yeah. Thank you so much. Again, we look forward to your getting the links, and also going and watching this webinar again. Share it with friends and family to be able to watch. We look forward to seeing you at the next workshop. Wendy, do you recall what it is? I did not.
Beautiful Gardens on a Minimal Budget, and it's in just a couple weeks. It's like
hey, I
21st.
love that class. I love that class. Yeah. How do we work with pretty much any garden and make it more beautiful with less water, less input? It can be done. So join us then. Look forward to seeing you. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.